we talked about how loaded language sort of overfills words and phrases so that they have a greater meaning than their denotative meaning would lead you to believe. So where is that extra weight coming from in the language? If we're adding that extra content to the language, it provides an opportunity for us to add emotional content, to add some persuasive content. And in most cases, it allows us to add those things in a way that are not easily perceived by our audience. There are times we want to use that. There are times we want to use that effect in order to open the language up and provide more possibilities for meaning. We do it in poetry, we do it in stories, in novels, plays, any time where we want language to evoke emotional response. But if you evoke emotional response, then you are, to a certain extent, bypassing the critical faculties. I want to show you that. Show you how that works. Anytime, let me start again. Let me try it a different way. Back in the 90s, CBC international reporters, for a very short time, stopped using the word terrorist. And they stopped using the word terrorist because they recognized that they were only using it to describe people of a particular point of view. They weren't using it with all people who were acting against the state. So what does terrorist mean again? What is the direct, what would you say the fundamental meaning of terrorist is? Nothing? I'm getting nothing?
Nothing yet. Maybe ask again.
Okay, I'm going to move on then.
Okay.
So if we think about...
any violent attack against a state motivated by ideology. And someone else says, enacts violent action to make a point. Someone who causes commotion for political reasons. I like the use of the word commotion.
I do like the use of the word commotion. Here's my question. Does it have to be commotion? Could it be the threat of commotion? The threat of violence? And is it commotion?
Someone says yes, it could be a threat.
Right. So let me ask another question. If I go into a liquor store and tell them to give me all their money, am I committing an act of terrorism? Because I promise you
Someone says that's robbery.
Well, how's it different? I'm telling you...
It's not for political reasons.
How would I define that at gunpoint? What would political reasons look like? How would they be distinct?
It's not on a large scale? Does it have to be on a large scale?
I don't know.
No, you're not targeting a country or a group of people.
So it has to be targeting a country.
Or a group of people.
Group of people. Well, it could be the people inside that liquor store.
Right. What if we're targeting liquor store employees?
Yeah.
It's not in a highly populated location. Someone says, political reason, wanting a restructure of society.
So I want you to ask yourself, do the definitions I'm getting from you apply to all terrorists that you can think of?
You're motivated by money, not religion or politics.
So anybody who's a real terrorist doesn't care about money.
Radical group with radical views, someone says.
All right. So,
What about, does that mean hippies are terrorists?
the worst terrorists ever.
Yeah, apparently.
There were terrorists who emerged out of the counterculture movement. I want us to come up with a workable definition for terrorist, and I want to be able to distinguish between terrorists and bank robbers. I want to be able to distinguish between terrorists and rioters.
They don't use violence or the threat of violence. Oh, he's saying that about hippies. They don't use violence or the threat of violence.
And if they do,
then they become terrorists.
Exactly. So it's the action that defines them, right?
Right?
So, what's the difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter?
Action and goal.
No, I need more.
None. Apparently.
And why is there no difference
Point
between...
of view, someone says. Someone else says nothing.
Let me give you an example.
One is acceptable in society and one is not.
I'm going to change. I'm going to take that and change it slightly. During the Irish War of Independence, my grandfather was a supporter of the original IRA, and in fact was a lawyer for the original IRA.
Oh,
IRA.
Interesting.
And he was arrested by the British authorities and held while they demanded that he give them the name and whereabouts of two IRA militants that he was representing. And in an action that resonates to this very day, every St. Patrick's Day we raise a glass in honor of the saints and martyrs of Ireland. Mm-hmm. My grandfather was imprisoned and sent this letter. He actually also had it.
Was he at Long Kesh?
No.
That's a different era.
No, yeah. So he was when he sent his response to the British authorities, and it had been drawn up by a calligrapher, because that's how O'Brien Morans do things.
Was he an O'Brien Moran?
Yes. Yes, my grandfather was the first O'Brien Moran.
Oh, good for him.
He sent a letter that said that he refused to acquiesce to their demands, and to do so would make him not worthy of the title of barrister. In fact, it would make him nothing more than a scoundrel. So he went to jail.
Wow.
Not for very long.
What a good speech, though.
Yes. He went to jail, not very long. He kept his beautiful house out in the country. But we're all very proud of that. All very proud of the fact that Grandfather Hugh was willing to die for the revolution, or the rebellion.
Go Grandfather Hugh.
Yeah. Do you know what those two soldiers, those two militants he was representing, do you know what they did? They came across two British soldiers on the road and they shot them in the back. We don't tell that part of the story, because they were patriots because they were fighting for the good cause. And the good cause was defined by those of us who believed that the British had no business being in Ireland at that time. Actually, at any time.
Which they didn't.
So we need to be careful with the use of words like terrorist. What terrorist means is a freedom fighter you disagree with. Mm-hmm. When you are using the language, or when you are using language that permits you to capture emotional responses within language, you are sneaking an argument into the words. So what's happening?
Just move it down a tiny bit.
So I want you to understand that what the problem is that the language starts to speak independent of the meaning. So we are able to sneak in an effect that the reader doesn't notice. Now, what I would be doing at this point, and I'm not sure whether it's going to work, I'm going to ask Natasha that.
Yes.
I'm going to show a video.
We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied. As long as our body is heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the city. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution, staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities. Knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friend, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children be able to sing with new meaning, my country tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
So what'd you think? Man's got some skills, doesn't he? I would argue that it is perhaps the most powerful public oratory in English in the latter half of the 20th century, anyway. It's brilliant. Did you notice anything about the technique that he was using? Did you notice that the rhythms came, the repetition was there, and the repetition is a stylistic feature of Southern Baptist black preachers. If you listen very carefully, you can hear another feature of that same group or that same community with, you can hear Mahala Jackson, who is a gospel singer, who is repeating or echoing things as soon as Martin Luther King Jr. says them, she will say them back to him. It's a call and answer thing that they use in blues music and in Baptist sermons. It is a way of involving the audience and a way of involving the congregation and collectively, emotionally rising to meet the content of the speech. The rhythms of the speech are designed to operate almost invisibly with the reception of English speakers, all kinds of things that he's doing. At the time at which he was speaking, it would have been much more obvious to his audience than it would be now that his speech was participating in a tradition of religious exhortation. He wanted people to feel. He wanted to speak to the heart as well as to the head. Why would you do that? Why do you work that hard to speak to the heart as well as the head? Because you want to circumvent reason. You actually want to speak emotionally, because emotion is not going to be vetted as carefully as the kind of denotative content of the speech. He is connecting with his audience. His audience feels what he's saying. And there's something that people don't know about that speech, or many of them don't know about that speech. That wasn't the speech he was planning to give. The speech he was planning on giving, the speech he had written to a greater extent with his colleagues. They had just come back from the South where they were trying to register black voters. All of those volunteers have been going down to try and register black voters. And there were people down there who did not want them to register black voters. And they were met by the state troopers, by the now it's still not coming to me. It's a particular feature in American military.
I got nothing.
Okay.
Sorry.
So it's a militia kind of thing.
National Guard?
National Guards, thank you. That's exactly what I
Thank
wanted.
you, Kate and Ben.
All right.
National Guard.
So they were met by a National Guard that had been called out. And National Guard is kind of a misnomer because it's really not a National Guard so much as it is a state guard. They had been called out by the governors to stop this unrest, to use military to stop the passionate unrest of the citizenry. I'm just going to stop there for a second and invite you to reflect on other times when people might have called out military to stop the population from protesting.
Someone says now? Question mark?
Where was it? In Seattle. One of the arguments that people were making against having done so is we do not call out armies on citizens.
But they do.
The problem is that there was a sense on the part of some members of the society, that we were approaching revolution. Revolution's got to be bad, doesn't it? The word revolution
Someone says no.
automatically suggests to us that we are going to unsettle the status quo. That can't be good, can it? Well, it can, because if the status quo is something that needs to be altered. Martin Luther King Jr. rewrote his speech. He changed his speech from a speech that was more similar to the kind of paper that I ask you to write, the kind of essay I ask you to write, with a lot of evidence to support your conclusions. What he decided was, they originally had put together a speech like that, but King decided to a much greater extent he was going to become a preacher again. That was his regular occupation. That he was not going to speak as a politician, he was going to speak as a minister. He was going to exhort people to come out. He was going to intentionally speak to their emotions, because he was trying to convince people to come out and risk their lives for a cause. And there's not a lot of us who risk our lives for data. Not a lot of us who will risk our lives because somebody shows us the reasons in support of it. We risk our lives because we are emotionally charged. We want to correct this thing that is wrong. If I wanted to get you to follow me to take over a class in which they were teaching calculus to poor, unsuspecting students, and I said to you, we are going to liberate them, wouldn't you feel kind of inclined to follow me? Liberating sounds like a good thing to be doing.
Someone wants to know if they can see the Hitler clip. It's in the PowerPoint. You can go click on it yourself, I think.
I just want to quickly do it.
Okay, well then I will go. Oh, it's working actually. Look at that. Ah!
Actually, I knew it was going to happen.
Too much Nazis.
So, I knew it was going to happen because it happened to me the last class I taught, last course I taught.
I'll put it back to the PowerPoint.
They took out that clip. That clip I had actually searched for a very, very long time. Going through, listening with my very, very rudimentary German, trying to find what I was looking for. I finally found that speech. And I picked that one in particular because it was the one speech that I could find in which Hitler did not say anything offensive. Nothing. They removed it because it was Hitler speaking. Mm. What that speech demonstrates, as you are going through it, especially after you've seen Martin Luther King Jr. speak, is how similar those speeches are. Hitler was speaking in 1935 to a downtrodden people, a people who had lost all power in their society, a people who did not see a future for themselves, a despised people, a people who were suffering injustice. He was speaking in exactly the same way that Martin Luther King spoke. In fact, you can find many of the same tropes in that speech, calling for people to sacrifice in order to correct the injustice. So, why am I pointing it out? I'm certainly not pointing it out because I want you to think any less of Martin Luther King Jr. I think Martin Luther King Jr. is one of the great individuals of his time. So why am I pointing it out? I'm pointing it out because loaded language works just the same in the hands of people who are arguing for good things as it does for people who are arguing for the bad things. And if you watch any old film of Adolf Hitler speaking, and you look at the crowds that are watching, those crowds are not responding intellectually. They are responding passionately, emotionally. Again, I'm going to invite you, and this is not a, if we were to meet outside of class, I'd be happy to tell you all of the terrible things that I say about Donald Trump. In class, not appropriate. That's not my point. My point is not that Donald Trump is unfit for office or any of the other things. My point is that what Donald Trump does in his rallies is the same thing that Hitler did in his rallies, is the same thing that Martin Luther King Jr. did in his rallies.
Someone asks, for the sake of discussion, what constitutes good and bad?
What does constitute good and bad? When I said it can be used for good as well as for evil, is there anybody out there who's arguing that Martin Luther King is bad? Doesn't matter, actually. Because if you think that he was bad, and if you think he was dangerous, and there was an awful lot of people who did, thought he was very dangerous, thought he was very bad for society, and he thought he was bad for his own population, that he was going to lead them a place where they did not want to be. So goodness and badness are always going to depend upon the audience. I would argue, in a different context, when we had more time, I would argue that there are, in fact, ways that we can say certain things are good and certain things are evil. Taken me a long time to get there, but I can do it now. But we can't do that right now. The point I want to make is that we need to be careful of language that speaks to the heart, because language that speaks to the heart operates differently. It does not ask its audience to carefully review the evidence. It asks its audience to respond emotionally. And when we respond emotionally, we often do things that reflect our biases, our socialization, our cultural values. We need to be careful about those things. Because often what we're doing is we are appealing to the understanding of cultural values in our audience, to those things that everybody knows. Everybody knows, and we don't even have to say it. We grow into the language that we use, and we grow into it guided by the people around us. And the way that we use language finally starts to operate in two ways. Sometimes it is a sublinguistic, now let me change that. Sometimes it becomes a semiotic system, a signing system that does not have to be mediated directly through language. It simply appears as if the values with which we operate are in fact representative of the real world. It appears not that I'm seeing this because I was a person who was raised in Canada by an Irish Catholic father. It looks that way because that's the way it really is. The problem that we have with cultural common sense is that it's not common. It really only applies to the people who were raised the same way that we were. It applies to people who see the world the same way we do, not because that's the way the world is, but because that's the way we were raised to see the world. So, when it comes to those kinds of assumptions, anybody ever tried to argue with somebody who holds a different religious view?
Yes.
And when you argue with that person, do you try to convince them that you are more right than they are? You are right and they are wrong?
Mm-mm. No.
How do you think it would work if you did?
Someone says, I let them try. Maybe that's when someone's arguing. Oh, I let them try to convince me.
Yes.
Thanks for clarifying, Ethan.
So, how does it work? It generally works this way.
It doesn't, someone said?
Yeah. You can't change people's beliefs, not as easily as you change their conclusions. And that's one of the things I want you to be very aware of. But because some of this is so completely woven into what we believe to be our natural experience of reality, that we can't undo it and see the degree to which it has been formed by the society in which we live. You'll see the suggestion or the example that I provide here. When you think about a map, and I've already answered my own question here, so I'm not going to ask you to answer. Why is north up? Why do we think north should be up? Is it up?
Up is relative.
Anybody really believe that? If I gave you a map on which north had been indicated, pointing down, south was pointing up, east was west, and west was east.
Depends on where you're standing.
It does. One of the problems that we have is we are incapable of escaping our orientation in the world. We think of those things as being natural, when in fact they're part of our acculturation. And those assumptions, even though they're never stated, are used to support our claims in an argument. Natasha,
Yes.
this morning we were talking about
How I got
supporting
here.
the claims. How did you get here?
My boyfriend drove me
Why?
because I don't have a car and because it's much easier than walking or busing.
Why should that matter to your boyfriend?
Because he cares about me.
And caring,
He likes to do nice things for me.
and is that a nice thing?
Yes, it is.
Forcing you into a car when you could have been getting some exercise?
I prefer to go in the car. It is my preference. He's saving me time.
Okay. How many of us recognize that there were all kinds of things in that argument that in fact were not factually based? We accepted Natasha's argument because it made sense to us in the context of people who share her culture. It is very, very difficult to make that kind of shift to a different culture. And because it is, it becomes very, very difficult to recognize your cultural assumptions in an argument, and very easy to recognize the assumptions of somebody from a different culture. But cultural assumptions are cultural assumptions. I know, it's hard to believe they pay me for this, isn't it? Cultural assumptions are cultural assumptions. They are not realities. They are simply interpretations of realities. They appear to be true. And we use true to refer to a thing that could not have been otherwise. But they're really not. They're just conventions. Kind of wasting your time with this stuff, aren't I? You guys know all of this. Do you understand how hard it is for somebody who comes from a culture in which racism is not only operating, but in fact is culturally, I'm not even going to say culturally accepted, culturally required, that is an expectation of one's society. It was very, very difficult at the time that Martin Luther King Jr. was marching to convince all kinds of members of the Southern Black community to participate. They thought it was dangerous. They thought it was bad for them. They did not flow to it. It inspired fear in them, and in many ways, it was against their own values of following the rules of a society. Even though from our perspective, being told that you could not sit in the front part of a bus or drink water from a particular water fountain seems vile and wrong, the people who were being victimized by those policies had internalized them to the extent that they seemed true. That made sense to them. That was the right way to do it. When we are talking about argument, we need to recognize that sometimes the argument that we are making is in fact no argument at all. That if you don't challenge, interrogate the assumptions, you may miss it. But if you do, you recognize that there is no logical relationship between the premises and the conclusion. This is one of my favorite examples. Canadians and Americans, North Americans in general, regard the horse as a noble creature, a symbol of freedom, comrade, even a friend. Think about how you feel about your dogs. I was going back to visit my family in Ireland one summer, and this was, I don't even know how long ago it was, probably maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And there had just recently in Western Canada had been this scandal. What we found was, actually it was Western United States. I can't remember which it was. Doesn't matter to you. Because some meat processing plants had been selling horse as beef. People were horrified. People absolutely horrified. I left Canada, hopped on a plane, got off a plane in Dublin and took the train down to Limerick where my family is. As soon as I got off, we were talking about, for some reason, and my cousins were having a tough time understanding what the fuss was about. Actually, let me change the way that I say that. My cousins, we were horrified because you don't eat horses. My cousins would have been put out because you were paying for beef and you got horse meat. There was nothing sentimental about it for them. There's no reason not to eat a horse. There's no reason that you have to put your clothes on when you come to class, is there? We'd had this conversation once before. How many women would be comfortable wandering around on a hot day without a shirt? More now than they would have been. But still, in most cases, people raised in our culture certainly wouldn't be doing it at home. They sometimes do it when they go somewhere else, because when you're on vacation, rules don't apply. Is it an act of indecency? Should you be charged if you're a woman who is out in public without a shirt? Is that a real thing? Or is that a cultural assumption? And is a cultural assumption a real thing?
Someone says it's cultural.
How many people think it's cultural?
Someone says the joy of online classes, that you can attend class. I suppose if your video's off, then no one would know.
Exactly. And if your video's on, I think it says something about you. You would be sitting in the nude and then turn your video on. How can this possibly be the sort of thing that we would outlaw? We outlaw it because it is reflective of a deeply held value that we have. But it's not real, is it? What I want you to think about is I want you to think about the assumptions that you make as you are writing arguments, as you are making arguments, as you are receiving arguments, and think about the degree to which those arguments are sustained not by objective reasons, to the extent that we can even find objective reasons, but sustained by our commitment to certain kinds of assumptions. All right?
Mm-hmm.
We got any more questions?
People are just saying they want to visit our office.
Yes.
I wish you could.
I wish you could. Well, when we're open again, feel free to come on by and say hello. Because I miss the fact that we didn't get to see each other.